So, Lisa, in this preliminary hearing, we learned that this situation stemmed from a fight between Asia Poole and one of the suspects, Janiyah Hendricks. Now, the other suspects who traveled to that apartment complex that summer, August night, are claiming self-defense. And their defense attorneys speaking on their behalf in the courtroom this morning that their clients, on behalf of their clients, that someone else in the breezeway where Asia Poole was standing fired first. Now, investigators say surveillance video from the Monarch Apartments, Facebook Lives, and video sent in to the department shows 6 to 10 people had weapons. Some included ARs, pistols, and Dracos. The detective testified the suspects charged: Acoria Woods, Janiyah's brother, Justin Hendricks, a 17-year-old boy, and Taylor McLeod, in addition to 3 men and the victim, Asia Poole's brother. All of them had guns. Over 160 shots were fired that night. The detective who testified this morning disputed that they did not find shell casings in the breezeway to prove that someone fired towards the suspects. Now, one of the attorneys asked the detective if they asked or tested the gun ballistics for the 4 other people who were in the breezeway. He said no, and that another witness on scene told police she never saw Asia's brother fire his gun. When asked, have investigators interviewed Asia's brother? The investigator said they set up a time with him, but he never showed up. Now, Acoria Woods was granted a $250,000 bond today. 2 of the men who are also charged in this case have bond denied, and the minor in this case, his bond hearing will be tomorrow morning. Now, Miss Hendricks here in this case, she was not at this preliminary hearing because she is facing different charges. Her charges are stolen property. Police told us in August that she stole Miss Poole's car. We're live in Birmingham. I'm Magdala Dusan.
She was only 21 years old, a young mother, a daughter, a sister, a woman who still had dreams left to chase and a little boy to raise. Now, all that's left are candlelight vigils, bullet-scarred walls, and a family that can barely speak her name without breaking. They call it World War III, a scene so chaotic, so terrifying, that neighbors say they had no choice but to throw themselves to the ground, praying they wouldn't be hit. Cars riddled with bullets, apartment windows shattered, children screaming in the distance. And all of it was captured in real time, live streamed for the world to see. More than 160 rounds were fired into the night. Pistols, automatic rifles, different angles, different shooters. And at the end of it all, a young woman lay motionless on the ground, her life stolen, her child left motherless. Her name was Asia Alyce Poole, 21 years old, a mother of 1. A woman whose last moments were caught not by family, not by friends, but by strangers watching live on Facebook. Why did this happen? How does a fist fight between 2 women spiral into an ambush with more than 100 rounds fired? Who pulled the triggers that ended Asia's life, and why? This is the story of fight, a live stream, and a young mother's death. A story of love, jealousy, fear, and silence. A story that forces us to ask, how do we get here?
Welcome to Twisted Crimes Files, where the darkest truths come to light. Stay with us for chilling stories you won't forget, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a case.
Her name was Asia Alyce Poole, 21 years old, born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. To the people who loved her, she wasn't just another young woman in the city. She was a mother, a daughter, and a friend who carried the weight of responsibility far too early in life. On the night of August 20th, Asia was caught in a violent eruption at the Monarch Ridge Apartments, a sprawling complex on Gallant Drive in East Birmingham. The place had long been known for its history of crime, and many residents had already grown used to the sound of gunshots breaking the silence of the night. But nothing prepared them for what unfolded that evening. Asia's body was found lying outside, her life cut short before paramedics could save her. Nearby, another victim, a man described as her close friend, had been struck by gunfire but managed to survive. For investigators, it was not just another crime scene. It was a place drenched in fear, littered with shell casings, and surrounded by residents who refused to step forward, terrified of what might happen if they spoke. The police quickly confirmed that this wasn't just an isolated tragedy. It was one of the most brazen and violent shootings the city had seen in years. In the first few hours after the gunfire stopped, there were more questions than answers. How had a fistfight spiraled into a coordinated attack? Why was the incident broadcast live on social media, as if it were entertainment? And, perhaps most hauntingly, who really wanted Asia dead? This case is not just about shooting. It's about a neighborhood trapped between silence and survival. It's about a mother whose future ended in a parking lot, and a little boy who will grow up without her. And it's about a question that still lingers in Birmingham. Was Asia Poole the target of an ambush, or was she simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Before her name was tied to headlines and police reports, Asia Poole was known simply as Asia. She grew up in Birmingham, surrounded by family who always said she had a quiet strength about her. She wasn't loud or confrontational by nature, but she carried herself with a confidence that made people notice her when she walked into a room. From a young age, Asia was someone people leaned on. Friends remember her as dependable, the type of person who would lend her last dollar if she thought it would help. Teachers described her as bright, though sometimes distracted by the weight of the world outside the classroom. She wasn't born into ease, but she carried her hardships with a determination to create something better for herself. That determination sharpened when she became a mother. Having her son at a young age changed everything. Overnight, her priorities shifted. Friends say she poured every ounce of herself into him. Her social media filled with photos of his smile, birthday celebrations, and the little milestones that only a mother would notice. To Asia, he wasn't just her child. He was her reason for being. Her personality came alive online. In photos and videos, she showed her humor, her style, her warmth. She wasn't a celebrity, but in her circle, she had a presence, the kind of person whose posts people looked forward to. She was outspoken, protective, and deeply loyal to the people she loved. To her family, Asia was more than just a young woman trying to navigate life. She was the heartbeat of their home. Her mother remembers her laughter filling the kitchen. Her siblings recall how she always made sure to check in, no matter how busy life became. Her friends say she was the one they could call late at night, knowing she would pick up. Asia was young, but she had lived enough to know life wasn't guaranteed. And yet, no one who knew her could have imagined that her story would end the way it did, suddenly, violently, and with questions that still linger. Like many young women her age, Asia's personal life was a mix of loyalty, love, and complicated ties that were sometimes as heavy as they were intoxicating. She had people close to her who she trusted, but she also found herself caught in circles where loyalty was tested and jealousy was never far behind. Friends said she wasn't the type to back down if she felt disrespected. She carried herself with dignity, but when it came to matters of the heart, emotions often ran high. There was a man in her life who became the center of tension, a connection that sparked rivalries and whispered arguments behind closed doors. The dynamic wasn't always peaceful. What began as moments of affection could quickly turn into heated exchanges that played out not only in private, but sometimes online where eyes were watching and assumptions were made. Posts, likes, and comments became fuel for conflict, and in a world where everything lived on social media, every gesture was open to interpretation. Asia, like so many young women, walked the fine line between protecting her happiness and proving her loyalty. To her, relationships weren't casual, they meant something. But that very intensity also drew her into disputes that seemed to follow her, whether she wanted them to or not. The people around her knew there were tensions building. Some of it revolved around love. Some of it revolved around pride. And some of it came from the company kept, friends who could turn into enemies, and enemies who never really let go of grudges. For Asia, these pressures became part of daily life. Yet even in the middle of it all, she continued to share her joy, her laughter, and her devotion to her child. Those who loved her saw a young mother trying to balance everything at once. Love, family, friendship, and survival in a world where one wrong move could spark something dangerous. What no one realized was just how close that danger was. August 20th began like any other day for Asia Alyce Poole. It was late summer in Birmingham, the kind of day heavy with heat that clings to the air even as the evening draws closer. For Asia, the morning started in the rhythm she knew well, tending to her little boy, checking her phone, exchanging messages with friends. There was nothing in her words that morning to suggest her life would be cut short by nightfall. Throughout the afternoon, she stayed in touch with people close to her. A few light-hearted messages, a post that hinted at confidence and strength. Beneath the surface, however, conversations were unfolding about tensions that had been simmering. A disagreement that had roots in relationships and pride was about to come to a head. As the sun lowered, Asia made her way to the Monarch Ridge apartments. This wasn't unfamiliar territory. The complex was known for gathering crowds outside in the evenings, people leaning against cars, talking, laughing, sometimes arguing. On this night, it would become the stage for something far darker. By early evening, her presence hadn't gone unnoticed. Messages circulated, words spread quickly, and before long, others arrived. What began as whispers and sideways glances shifted into open confrontation. A woman approached her, voices rose, and soon a crowd had formed. Phones were out, recording, streaming, broadcasting what was about to unfold to hundreds watching in real time. Asia stood her ground. Words turned into shoves, and shoves turned into fists. Neighbors later said it looked like a typical fight, the kind of dispute that happens when pride and anger collide. But behind the fight, there were movements that no one could ignore. Cars shifted into position. Men lingered in the background. People weren't just watching, they were preparing. As the minutes ticked by, tension thickened. The fight was pulled apart, but the energy didn't settle. The air carried something sharper now, an edge that suggested the night wasn't over. Asia could not have known that her final hours were being counted down in those moments, surrounded by people who would later describe the scene as an ambush waiting to happen. The clock crept toward 10 o'clock. Within minutes, the ordinary noise of a Birmingham evening would be replaced by chaos. Asia's last day, one that began with the routines of motherhood and the chatter of friends, was now hurtling toward its violent end. The quiet of the evening shattered just after 10 o'clock. Residents of Monarch Ridge would later recall the moment the first shots rang out, sharp, echoing cracks that multiplied in seconds until it felt like the entire complex was under siege. Witnesses said it was impossible to count them in real time. The sound came from different directions, overlapping, relentless. Within moments, more than 160 rounds tore through the night sky. Bullets pierced car doors, shattered windows, and ripped into the walls of nearby apartments where families huddled in fear. In the chaos, Asia Alyce Poole collapsed. She had no chance to run, no chance to shield herself. Neighbors described seeing her fall as the crowd scattered, each person scrambling for cover wherever they could find it. Another victim, a man described by those close to her as a trusted friend, was struck as well, though he would survive. By the time the gunfire stopped, the parking lot looked like a battlefield. Smoke hung in the air, glass crunched beneath fleeing footsteps, and the cries of the wounded and terrified filled the silence left by the guns. Residents who dared to peek outside their windows later said they thought the building itself was going to collapse from the sheer weight of bullets tearing through its frame. First responders arrived within minutes, guided by frantic 911 calls and the flashing images already circulating online from the livestream. Paramedics rushed to Asia's side, but it was too late. The young mother who had walked into that night with determination was now still. Her life ended in an instant. She was pronounced dead at the scene. For Birmingham police officers, this was not just another shooting. It was an eruption of violence unlike anything they had seen in recent memory. The number of shell casings littering the ground told its own story. This wasn't random gunfire. It was coordinated. It was targeted. It was war carried out in the middle of a residential community. And at the center of it all was the body of a 21-year-old mother, her child now left without her, her family left to ask how a fight could have spiraled into something so deadly. The morning after the shooting, daylight revealed the full scope of the devastation. Shell casings marked nearly every corner of the parking lot. Cars sat riddled with bullet holes, their tires flattened, their glass scattered across the pavement. Apartment walls carried scars of gunfire, puncturing living rooms where children had once been playing just hours earlier. For investigators, this wasn't just a crime scene. It was a message. Detectives from the Birmingham Police Department began their work immediately, canvassing residents and collecting evidence. Neighbors were hesitant to talk, fearful of retaliation, but video was everywhere. Apartment surveillance cameras had captured angles of the fight and the aftermath. Dozens of phones had recorded the clash. And then there was the Facebook live stream. More than 3 minutes of raw chaos, uploaded in real time and now central to the case. From those recordings, police identified multiple shooters. The placement of vehicles in the lot suggested strategy, not spontaneity. Cars have been positioned to block exits, limiting anyone's ability to escape. Witnesses described it as an ambush, and the evidence seemed to support that claim. But as arrests were made, another narrative began to surface. Defense attorneys for some of the suspects argued that the shooting wasn't a planned assault, but an act of self-defense. They claimed the fight set off a chain of reactions where young people, already armed and on edge, resorted to violence out of fear. For investigators, the motive was still tangled in questions of pride, jealousy, and long-standing disputes. Some pointed to a relationship at the heart of the conflict, a love triangle that spiraled out of control. Others believed it was less about romance and more about territory, loyalty, and reputation. The truth lay buried under a storm of bullets, each casing representing another voice in a conversation no one wanted to have. What was undeniable was this: Asia Poole did not fire a gun that night. Yet she paid the ultimate price for a conflict that should have ended with words, not gunfire. Theories swirled, but certainty remained elusive. Was this a targeted execution? A fight that got out of hand? Or a community too consumed by silence and fear to stop the violence before it erupted? In the days after the shooting, the echoes of gunfire were replaced by the sound of grief. For Asia Poole's family, the news was unbearable. A mother lost her daughter, a child lost his mother, and siblings lost the one who was supposed to grow old beside them. Her family described her not by the way she died, but by the way she lived. They spoke of a girl with an infectious smile, someone who could brighten a room even when her own life wasn't easy. They remembered her laughter, the way she teased her siblings, the way she carried herself with pride despite the struggles that surrounded her. For her son, just 4 years old, the loss was beyond comprehension. Relatives told reporters he kept asking where his mother was, too young to understand that she would never again walk through the door. One neighbor said quietly, "That little boy has been left fatherless and motherless all at once, and he doesn't even know it yet." Friends shared stories of Asia's loyalty, how she stood by people, how she defended them, even when it wasn't convenient. To them, she wasn't just a victim of a violent night. She was the girl who checked on them when no one else did, the friend who made sure you never felt alone. At candlelight vigils, dozens gathered holding balloons and photos, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of candles. Her name was written on posters, shouted in chants calling for justice. Strangers cried alongside family, some mourning her, others mourning what her death represented. Another young life stolen, another child left behind. Her family begged for answers, begged for accountability. They couldn't understand how a simple fight had ended with their loved one lying in a pool of blood, her story broadcast for the world to watch. To them, Asia's death was not just tragic, it was senseless, and it demanded justice. In their voices, you hear more than grief. You hear the weight of a future stolen, of birthdays that will never be celebrated, of milestones that will never come. For them, Asia isn't just a name on a case file. She is their daughter, their sister, their mother, and they will not let her memory fade quietly. As the grief settled, investigators pushed forward. Within days, names and faces began to emerge. One by one, arrests were announced, and the community watched closely as the pieces of the puzzle came together. First came the capture of 20-year-old Justin Hendricks, followed by 22-year-old Taylor McLeod. Both were charged with murder and attempted murder. Soon after, 19-year-old Janiyah Hendricks was taken into custody, accused not of pulling a trigger, but of stealing Asia's car in the chaos of that night. Then came 20-year-old Akria Dene Woods, facing charges that included murder, attempted murder, and firing into an occupied vehicle. Finally, police announced the arrest of a 17-year-old male, charged as well with murder, though his name was withheld because of his age. For many in Birmingham, the arrest brought a measure of relief, but not closure. The sheer number of people charged spoke to how deep the violence ran. 5 individuals, all young themselves, now faced life-altering consequences for the roles they played in a night that ended with one mother dead and another man wounded. Court hearings revealed conflicting narratives. Prosecutors painted a picture of an ambush, cars deliberately positioned, weapons drawn, and more than 160 rounds fired without regard for who might be hit. Defense attorneys countered with claims of self-defense, suggesting that fear and panic had fueled the eruption of gunfire. Each version left the public with more questions than answers. Meanwhile, residents of Monarch Ridge remained trapped in fear. Some whispered that retaliation might follow. Others stayed silent, unwilling to testify, unwilling to be the next target. Parents held their children closer, knowing that safety in their own homes had already been shattered. City leaders turned their attention to the complex itself. Monarch Ridge, once Valley Brook, had a history written in gunfire. Years earlier, the city had sued its owners, demanding better security, but the promises of change had faded. Now, after Asia's death, officials demanded action again. Cameras connected to the real-time crime center, license plate readers, and the return of on-site security. It was an attempt to stop the cycle before another family faced the same heartbreak. Community voices rose louder in the weeks that followed. At vigils, marches, and press conferences, the call was the same: justice for Asia, safety for those still living in fear, and accountability for a system that allowed violence to take root. Her name became a rallying cry. Her story a symbol of the toll that silence and unchecked violence continue to take. For her family, the arrests meant the beginning of a long legal battle. For her community, they meant a reckoning with the reality that change would not come easily. And for Birmingham, they were a reminder that justice is not just about convictions in a courtroom. It is about breaking a cycle that has claimed too many lives already. Asia Alyce Poole's story is more than a headline. It is the story of a young mother whose life was stolen in front of an audience, in a world where violence is too easily broadcast and too quickly forgotten. She was 21 years old, with dreams still unwritten and a child who will grow up with only memories and photographs to hold on to. Her death forces us to ask hard questions. How does a simple fight spiral into one of the most violent ambushes Birmingham has ever seen? How does fear keep entire neighborhoods silent, even as bullets pierce their walls? And how many more families must bury their children before something changes? For her loved ones, there are no easy answers. They will carry her memory every day. They will carry the pain of knowing she should still be here. And they will carry the responsibility of raising her son without the mother who gave him life. This story is not just about one night at Monarch Ridge. It is about a community caught in the crossfire of anger, pride, and silence. It is about young lives lost to cycles of violence that show no mercy. And it is about a child who deserves more than to grow up with his mother's name etched in tragedy. So we ask you, remember Asia's name. Remember her story. Talk about it. Share it. Let it be more than another moment lost in the noise of social media. If you believe her story matters, if you believe her life meant something, then do not let her memory fade. Like this video. Share it so her voice can be heard beyond Birmingham. Comment your thoughts, your prayers, your calls for change. And subscribe for more stories that deserve to be told, stories that demand justice, and stories that remind us all that silence is never the answer. For the sake of her son, for the sake of her family, and for the sake of every young life lost too soon. Speak up, stay aware, and never forget.